Hi there, I am Belinda Garth, Lead of Gender Equity and Leadership at the Monash Centre for Health Research and Implementation. It is my pleasure to run you through this short presentation that will provide you with a high-level overview of the Maturity Matrix tool and how you might be able to use this in your organisation. So first, let's put this into context. So here we have your organisation, and the organisation is bound by legislation, which is the case for many organisations, to demonstrate that they are taking action to improve gender equality in their workplace and in the services that they deliver. So along those lines, there are a bunch of things that are implemented across the organization, whether that's policies, there's processes, training, as well as evaluation, and many more things. So the organisation then needs to report on their outcomes. What impact have these initiatives had? Is it shifting the dial and getting the outcomes that we are looking for? And this is really important to be able to monitor these outcomes. But how can you monitor your organisation's progress along the way? This is really important. With many competing demands, how do you know what's working and what's not? How do you know what to focus your resources on? Your resources are limited. You need to be able to prioritize, and how do you do that? So the maturity matrix is developed by the Monash Centre for Health Research and Implementation for organisations to use to assess and to guide their progress in implementing gender equity processes toward achieving gender equality in leadership. So it's a practical evidence-based tool. And in terms of the evidence base that sits behind this, we have adapted this from engineering and implementation science tools, and it's informed by the consolidated framework for implementation research and the learning health systems model. So in effect, organisations using this maturity matrix tool, they perform a self-assessment of their gender equity interventions across 4 learning system evidence domains, which are here around this circle. So these, including their subcomponents. So we have stakeholder derived evidence, and the subcomponents there are around stakeholder engagement, priority setting, and then we have evidence that's derived from research, followed by practice evidence, and then implementation. And this is an iterative cycle that continues on with learning and improvement. So importantly, this tool is intended to meet organisations wherever they are on their gender equity and leadership journey. So whether you're in an organisation that is just starting out, or if you are really leading the way and doing a lot of things and have been doing a lot of things for a number of years, it's a tool that grows with you, helping teams to continuously learn, evolve, and improve across all areas of gender equity, diversity, and inclusion. So assessment here begins with the stakeholder engagement quadrant, and it progresses sequentially through each domain, moving through to research, evidence, practice-derived evidence, and then concluding with implementation, ensuring a logical and cumulative development pathway. But as I said before, it doesn't fully conclude. Things are implemented, but then evaluated and improved, and so then the cycle begins again. It is iterative. So to evaluate organisational maturity, each of these subcomponents has an associated set of evaluation criteria across 5 maturity levels. And so you can see those beginning from the inner part of that circle, from not started to beginning, developing, established, and then transformative. So an organisation that demonstrates a transformative level processes across all 8 components would result in improvements in gender equality over time when you compare that to an organisation where some of the components may be not started or at beginning levels. So if we have a look of an example of how the maturity matrix can be applied in this instance in a Victorian public health service. So here the context is, in this example, this health service has implemented quite a range of organisational and systems level changes over the last decade, and has demonstrated a long-term commitment to gender equity. So when applying the maturity matrix for this organisation to say, okay, how are we going? How do we know what we need to improve on in order to meet the outcomes that we're seeking? They would use the maturity matrix to self-assess their progress across each of those 4 domains. So if we have a look, for example, with the stakeholder domain, this domain is about using evidence from stakeholders, so listening to the lived experiences and setting priorities based on what matters most to the people affected. So here the organisation has identified strengths in their leadership development and data collection, and they've highlighted improvements in stakeholder engagement and priority setting. So what happens is, guided by this tool and these questions, we can see that the maturity is measured according to adherence to, firstly, how well are stakeholders engaged in this organisation. So the organisation would then have a look at those maturity levels and think, well, where are we at here? How well are we doing with that? In this case, the organisation has, people from their workforce, from employees across all career levels, embedded in governance structures. So that includes things like the Gender Equality Committee and more. And their employees are consulted on policy, for example, the things around flexible work and how it's working for them. So that's aligning really well with integrating stakeholders and engaging stakeholders. So here the organisation has, assessed themselves as pretty established. And then when having a look at the other subcomponent, looking at priority setting, here the prompt kind of question is around, well, how are priorities integrated into existing decision making and project planning within the organization? So it's looking at, have you got, in this case, I should say, the organisation had a look at that and thought, well, we're actually really just beginning here because we are engaging with our stakeholders and we are starting to identify issues around gender equity. We're starting to, explore priority setting, looking, we've got a long list of things that are important, but there's still work to do. So they have assessed themselves here at the beginning stage. If we jump forward just to have a look at the practice domain, in this domain, the evidence comes from current practice and data. So it looks at what's already happening in the organisation to inform the next steps. So here the organisation might look at, how well data they have are captured and accessed. Is it a matter of you've got a lot of data, it's all sitting there, but it is so hard to pull out and make sense of? In this case, the organisation, through working with us, they were able to access and analyse meaningfully some of their workforce data that has been collected across their sites. And so they assess themselves at the kind of developing level. So, and again, when they were looking at their benchmarking, prompted by the question, around how well data are analysed and used to then inform improvement activities. This organisation, through again their partnership with us, were able to use evidence-based reports to then identify what's working in their organisation and what their opportunities are for improvement. So again, they're around that developing phase. So then we have a visual output. So this is quite helpful. I'm a visual person myself. I love something that can just show me in an image where things are at, particularly in such a complex world where we have many things competing for our attention. So this radar chart illustrates the health services maturity levels across the domains. So what it's showing us in the middle of the slide there is that this organisation has pretty solid maturity at multiple levels, but it can improve on priority setting, for example, and it will mature and iteratively drive change to improve equality. So what this does is it helps the organisation to kind of see at a glance, where they can target their action planning with, resources that are really stretched. Where do we focus our efforts? We can see here, okay, the organisation is doing pretty well around their evidence generation. They're implementing a bunch of stuff, but actually their priority setting isn't so strong. So maybe that's an area that they would focus on. So overall, the maturity matrix aims to guide organisations. It helps them to measure and benchmark their organisational maturity on gender equity practices. It helps them to focus on systems and organisational evidence-based practice and culture change. It helps to guide effective next steps for improvement and alignment with gender equality practices. It addresses gender equality as an ongoing system change and processes, and it promotes this organisational accountability and transparency. And it engages organisations and empowers them with their effective organisational change. So that's a really quick snapshot of what this might look like and how you might be able to use the maturity matrix. You can reach out to us through these different methods if you'd like more information, and there will be other tools and resources available for you. But thank you for listening, and I hope it's been useful.